Have you ever painted an expansive vista, mountains, distant rivers, the whole thing, only to realize that your finished painting looks flat? Like those distant mountains are in your neighbor's yard rather than miles away. The problem almost never is your colors, it's how light or dark your colors are, what we artists call value. Get that wrong, and everything collapses to the same depth. Get it right, and anyone who looks at your painting feels like they can step into it and walk for miles. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how to use value to push those distances back where they belong. I've mixed up two colors in my palette on the right, Cobalt blue and Undersea green. They're very thin, but about the consistency of tea. The blue is to paint the sky, and the green is to drop into the foreground. Load your brush completely because the blue must cover the whole page. Here's how to use a large brush to lay down the first wash using a chip brush. Now it makes a pattern, but I'm going to paint over it anyway. See how the paint is pooling at the bottom of that stroke? That's a bead, a small reservoir of wet pigment. That bead is what lets me keep working downward without the wash drying on me mid-stroke. I just rinsed my brush a little bit to lighten that color a little bit, but I've lost my bead. So I'm going to use a wetter brush, get that bead reestablished. I'm bringing some green down here in the lower wash, but I'm staying out of the mid-range intentionally. If I paint the green there, it'll end up in the lake. This is how I control the colors during this first wet wash, by waiting to add the forest around the lake after the wash is dried. And you see how I'm getting this nice diffuse color? So very, very juicy wash for this first layer. I'm adding in some Hansa yellow light to capture those spring leaves. The Serpentine Genuine is doing its job where it's separating on the paper and you can see some specks of brown or sort of a burnt sienna color. The separation of color will add to the texture, and texture is important in the foreground because those details make it seem closer to the viewer. Now you can see that I worked very quickly going down the paper, and yet I've got a backwash in here. Because this is the first layer, I'll be able to cover that backwash with another layer of paint, and that will make it disappear. Now that it's dried, I can see that my water, which should really mirror the sky, is too light. So I'd like to add more blue to that. But first, I have another problem to deal with. The sky transition came out more abrupt than I wanted. So I'm adding another mountain range here. And this isn't just a fix, it's actually a better composition. More layers of receding values means more depth. The eye now has more stops on its journey back into the distance. I'm going to take my pencil, and this will be smaller yet, so these mountains will be a little bit taller than what I'm about to draw in. This also is an example of me letting the painting tell me what it needs. We don't always have to paint exactly what we see. I'll brush in this most distant mountain, then the mountain right in front of it. While the second mountain range is drying, I'll darken the lake. I'm going to keep the same blue color, and I just want it to be a slight bit darker. Because in here, when I start bringing in the actual color of the forest, where it's still kind of a bluish green color, it needs to be darker than these mountains, but not as green as these. So I will paint this in such a way that I'll get a little bleeding, but I think that's going to be a little more atmospheric. I can tell you right now, I think that that's not dark enough. I just got a little bit more blue paint. Yeah, that's darker. We painted this together in my online community, Painting with Peggy. It was fun. We saved the replays and the links in the description. And the reason why I'm using a large brush here is because it holds a lot of pigment and I won't have to go back into the well as much. Leaving out the light sandy beaches that you can see in the reference photo. Too much detail in the midground tells the viewer's brain, this is close. It pulls everything forward. Part of creating depth is deciding what not to paint. The detail lives in the foreground, and the distance needs to stay soft. Remember what I said earlier about this backwash? See how it's disappearing as I paint the blue on the lake. I'm stopping to check the value relationship between these distant mountains. And right now, they're too close to the same value. When two things read at the same value, your eye puts them at the same depth. The distance collapses. I need to lift some color from those mountains to push them back. The risk with lifting is that staining pigments won't come up cleanly, which is one reason I chose non-staining colors for these distant layers. Now for lifting, I'm using a Nicpro brush. Also, any brush with golden taklon bristles will work. They're slightly stiffer than natural hair, which gives you a little more scrubbing power, without destroying the paper. With a slightly wet brush, I'm scrubbing the area gently, then dabbing my brush on my towel to remove any pigment, and then repeating that until it's light enough. All right, so let's see what that looks like when it dries. If I need to, I may compensate with a little more value in here, but let's see how that goes. Now what I want to do is I want to start bringing in a darker green yet for this part of the forest around the water. It needs to be a little on the blue side, so I have some of that, and I'll start with that. But then I want to start making it more green, so I'm going to work with this undersea green. I've tilted my board, and you can see how the green is blending with the wet cobalt blue undersea green mixture already on the paper. To push that darker green further, I'm brushing on some more concentrated undersea green. I need to adjust the color here, but since this section is starting to dry, if I only repaint a part of it, I'll get a backwash, and I don't want one. To make this work without getting a backwash, I'm painting over the entire section. That way, the section has the same moisture all across it, and that's what will let me adjust the color without getting a backwash. The undersea green has made the trees look too warm, and warmth pulls the objects closer to the viewer. If we want depth, that's not the direction I want to go. So I'm going to add in some shadow green to cool that down and push those trees back into the distance a bit. And I'm going to go back and forth between the undersea green and the shadow green. And what that will do is it'll start to suggest, some differences in the shape of the terrain. I'm going to add a little blue to this section of the forest to push those trees back into the distance. And then more shadow green at the base. Okay, same idea on the left side with some undersea green and shadow green. This is undersea green right here. And then a little bit of shadow green on the side here. So now this section here, the tops of the trees are fairly warm looking. I'm not putting reflections in the distant water. Reflections are detail, and detail says close. The far water says simple and light. That's what keeps it feeling like it's miles away. For this tree canopy, I'm loading the chip brush with shadow green on one side and undersea green on the other. Two colors in one stroke, which creates natural variation. More importantly, I'm dabbing, not painting individual trees. Suggestion is the right tool here, not description. That way I'll get a soft blending of tree shapes without painting every leaf. I'm switching to a liner brush to paint in the trees that meet the edge of the water here. I need a little more precision and maintain the looseness. And hold at the tip so it's not, I don't want it to be under super tight control, and then that way it's more random. So I'm going to attempt to use some negative painting to try to cut out the shape of this tree's leaves. While this is still damp, I'm using an old plastic card to lift out tree trunks. What this creates is light verticals, the suggestion of sunlight striking the trunks. I'm doing this selectively, only in the foreground area. Bright defined trunks in the foreground adds exactly the kind of detail that pulls that zone toward the viewer. I'll use the trees that are in the composition to help me do this. I often find that I miss that that perfect moment when the paint is drying, but not all the way dry, and that it's thick enough to be able to do this. So if you try it and it doesn't work, just keep practicing. Um, and you can see it's backfilling in some of these places, but I like that because it gives a more uneven line, and that's more interesting. So this here is a combination of undersea green and shadow green in the same well. And I'm just going to spatter a little bit in here. I'm adding cadmium yellow here. This wasn't planned, but the foreground trees are reading a little flat against the midground, and I want to warm them up and separate them. So a warmer, brighter color in the foreground versus the cooler, more neutral color in the distance is another tool for creating depth beyond just value. The values of these two ranges are too close together and make them look like they're, the same distance away. If I don't make the closer range darker, this part of the painting will appear flat. I'm darkening the second to the last range to ensure a sense of depth. Well, that worked. That's definitely darker, but not too much darker. I've been talking about not putting detail in the distance so that the distance doesn't get too much attention versus the foreground, and thereby making the painting look flat. But there is one exception. When you put an object in this painting that's clearly in the distance, that is something that the eye can travel to, and you want your viewer's eye to travel around the painting. So I am going to paint in this bridge. It's in pencil right now, and this will give a focal point to the viewer when they look at the painting. They'll know that it's in the distance. What we want to avoid is unnecessary detail. This bridge is part of the story, and it's earned its place. And if you want to paint this kind of scene live with other painters and get feedback in real time, that's what we do every week at paintingwithpeggy.com. Links in the description. Value gets your distance right, but there's another tool that takes it even further. Color temperature. Warm colors advance and cool colors recede. When you combine that with value, you get depth that really convinces. I go deep into that in this video.